All right, Zig coming in on the top 10. The show we have Knox Chandler. Knox is a guitarist, composer, and musical educator. Knox has had a long and expansive career. Has been going for 4+ decades. He's been long-term members in groups such as Psychedelic Furs, Siouxsie The Banshees, and the Cyndi Lauper Band, just to name a few. After years of supporting and being creative partners with all these big acts, Knox is now diving into a solo career. And Knox's first release is called The Sound. It's a multi-sensory memoir in which Knox uses sound, visuals, and poetry to describe the memoir of his move from Berlin back to Long Island. It starts off as a book with visuals and poetry, and it's accompanied by a soundtrack. We're going to listen to a tune off that soundtrack. This is Tea-Stained Edge. Tea-Stained Edge. The tune, the album, the sound, Knox Chandler, the artist. You can pick up the recording and the book off Knox Chandler's Bandcamp. It's linked below. This was a really interesting conversation. It's always interesting to hear someone who's got to support a lot of big artists and now is embarking on their own adventure, kind of always reminding us, no matter what we are and what we're doing, what best represents ourselves is what we should be doing. Before we get in this interview, I have a quick update about what I have going on. I play in a band called Sea Level, letter C-Level. We are a high-energy funk-punk reggae rock group. It takes 12-string acoustic guitars and runs them through Marshall amplifiers. We are having a single release June 13th at the Winchester featuring Pete Francis. So we recorded a tune with Pete Francis of the band Dispatch called Long-Legged Fly. It'll be available on all the streaming platforms. And Pete is coming to Cleveland, to the Winchester, June 13th to help us celebrate the release of said single. This is a very special show for the band and I. Dispatches have been a huge influence. And what makes this show even crazier is Pete was super cool and was like, well, how about you guys back me? And so we're going to be opening for Pete and backing Pete. It's going to be super, super sick. We're really excited about it. Tickets linked below. If you hear anything you like, if you can like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests like Knox and sharing their insights with you. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Knox. Awesome.
Okay, great.
Well, I kind of want to jump in with the whole, starting with kind of education in that sense. Can you tell me about studying with Woody Mann?
Oh, that was, I don't know, how did you even hear about that? It was when I was in college. I went into college thinking that guitar was going to be my main instrument. And so I think I studied with him for my first year. And he was really fantastic, really brilliant. His whole approach to the guitar was very different than I'd ever been exposed to. And just a really nice guy. I wound up switching over and focusing more on upright bass by my sophomore year.
What was his approach like that made you re-examine, or what was so different about it?
He broke things down, if I remember right, and this is a long time ago. We're talking, Jesus, a really long time ago. I don't even want to say. His picking technique was very different than I've been exposed to, and the way he broke down scales, if I remember right, was very different. He kind of simplified a lot of things that I was probably overcomplicating.
I think that's like the trend of the guitar player kind of going into the academic realm is to and I think maybe it's like a something you kind of like compromise with, because as guitar players, like the whole kind of academic approach is kind of in the back burner in a sense. Like it's more of a feel instrument, you know what I mean? Like compared to like if you start on piano, you're pretty much starting with sheet music, you know, you're kind of already getting the basics when you're diving into it. But with guitar, you like most people's origin story is like I figured it out from the radio, or you know what I mean, and broke the record trying to figure out the licks, and it's like a different background that brings you into it. So I should say I found myself personally doing the same thing going into study music in college was like kind of like trying to overcompensate and dive deeper and make more mean more than maybe it did mean. So I can see how that would be like a impactful lesson for someone going through it at that
Yeah,
time.
and he really came from more of a roots background than a lot of the people I had been working with. So yeah, he was the real deal.
Awesome, man. So like, I guess, and to kind of tie it in with like the jump ahead a bit, like, so when you're teaching, have you found yourself kind of trying to maybe package lessons in a way like how he kind of did for you?
Oh, absolutely not. Nothing close to it. I I was living in Berlin, Germany, up until about 3 years ago, and I had the wonderful luxury of being hired by a university to be the head of the guitar department. And they put me through school to get another degree in education. Um, and it was much more less technical. I think the stuff I was doing with Woody was much more technical. Um, but this was really about teaching the students how to learn, and practicing these different techniques that I sort of kind of inherently felt in my gut and knew, but actually studying it, it just verified the fact that I was onto something in the first place. Because I started teaching, and then they put me through the course, so I was able to use what I was learning in the classroom, and then the data for a lot of my papers was picked up while in the classroom. I was basically researching on the job, and it was just these several. It's for me at that time and that age gap. It's the whole idea of learning about intrinsic motivation, and that's what happens at that age. You go from extrinsic to intrinsic, and it's really bridging the gap from, I guess, being memorizing stuff and utilizing it to actually, how do I learn how to utilize it in different situations in the workplace? So I was working a lot with threshold concepts and problem-based learning tasks.
Okay. Okay. So, and that's interesting too, because like, in a musician's sense, a lot of it is kind of shedding on a thing and finding an opportunity where that lick, that melodic idea, that harmonic structure, whatever it may be, fits, and kind of being ready for that moment. And like, to put it in the academic sense like that, did you find yourself kind of coming from years of a musical background having this challenge, like, but also kind of understanding it easier, or did it come easier to you, I guess?
But teaching?
Yeah, kind of like.
Well, I'd always taught guitar. Actually, interesting enough, before I went over to Berlin, I was working with this group called Road Recovery, and they were the tour manager of Jeff Buckley. And after he passed, they sort of took over his studio and started this organization to help young kids who are dealing with adversity. And some of that might be mental illness, and some of it might be addiction. And so I worked teaching them how to perform, how to write music. Even we used the studio to record them. We made CDs, and it's a pretty great organization. Um, but then I moved to Berlin, so I sort of had this love for sharing my experience and on top of that, I've always taught privately. So going into it was a bit different. It wasn't like teaching a guitar lesson. It was more like working with these kids at Road Recovery, and there's just certain techniques that I kind of felt worked, but I didn't really understand why, and until I actually got to study it.
I get what you're saying.
Um,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense
But
because like
but it wasn't so much about learning how to technically play guitar. There are teachers under me that they did that the bulk of that work. I would say, yeah, you'll learn your modes, your scales, your chords, with Nick, and when you come to me, you forget everything. there's only there's only one scale. It's chromatic.
nice.
Um,
That's true.
and 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 so, well, then there's notes in between those notes, but uh, yeah. So it wasn't like anything close to studying guitar with any of the teachers I've studied with, or teaching guitar with any of the students I work with. It was something very different that I really worked hard at, studied at, and found it found it fantastic and wonderful. It kind of opened my eyes and ears up quite a bit. And then I moved back. I did that for 7 years, and then I moved back here to Connecticut, and just haven't done it since. That was 3 years ago.
Gotcha. I mean, that's a like so it's I feel like a big bulk of like what maybe seems arduous as a guitar player, right? Is the technique, is like kind of getting over this hump of am I good enough as a musician, as a player to say I'm doing the thing. And it sounds like well that's a really kind of cool like place to be in where you were. So now you're getting people that have students that have kind of shedded the technique, and now you can kind of like go back to maybe what it is to do music, like, and really be able to be in
Yeah.
that space.
Well, it really depends. A good friend of mine is the principal bassist for the Berlin Philharmonic, and was teaching his son guitar. And I think if you're doing music on that scale, it's so technical and requires endless hours of practicing that specific thing, the technique. Um, my feeling about me, and I love it, and I go to the symphony all the time, and have it's one of my favorite gigs to go to. But I mean, I found that at a very early age that wasn't for me. I think, and I think everybody feels like it's all about technique. It's all about technique. And of course, these days there's just tons of YouTubes with these guitar players with incredible technique.
Right.
Uh, but and I've been to these shows of these with these technicians who are pretty famous, and I was mesmerized for 3 minutes and then bored shitless and left. Um, my feeling about it is what's more important and more to focus on is the autonomy, finding your voice. There's three things that's essential in intrinsic motivation. That's competency, connectedness, and autonomy. And my experience was in teaching that if I focus on the autonomy of the students, they tend to connect better with each other, their instrument, and the music they're trying to make, which somehow magically improves their competency, and they tend to get better. I mean, for me, what turns me on is hearing a guitar player and going, "Oh, I know who that is," immediately. Like one of my favorite solos is Neil Young's solo on "Cinnamon Girl." For the most part, it's one note, but you hear that note and it's just like, yes, it's like that sound, and it's just one note that grabs you. Um, so sometimes I wish I was technically a better guitar player. I mean, there's a lot of things I probably would like to play, but I made a decision a long time ago to focus more on my autonomy,
That's
and my technical side of it is more to do with the processing stuff that I've been studying, than actually sitting and playing scales faster.
I think that's really impactful. Like, and I can see how autonomy, especially going back to working with the group that was working with like adolescents going through coming from different places and going through recovery and one that I wanted to say earlier, that's a really cool organization. Like that had to be a really profound and like impactful experience to see students work with and find themselves. But I think that the autonomy of it, like, and the going through this course, I think that's a really interesting way to pinpoint it, because if you feel good about who you are and what you're doing, it makes sense that the competency will follow.
Yes, it's, well, at the end of the day, I mean, school is great. School's important. I think college is important so much because of the social learning aspect of it.
Right.
Um, but eventually, you're out in the real world, and I think to be a musician, you have to constantly continue learning. Otherwise, it's just not sustainable.
Right.
I mean, I feel the thing I love about my life is that there's always new doors opening that I can go down and explore, and these days with the internet, you can stay up until morning, doing the rabbit hole thing with whatever you're curious about, which is basically you're learning to teach yourself.
Yeah.
And that's big. And I think I thought my role in the university was to have these students realize that becoming a musician isn't going about money or fame or any of that stuff. It's really about developing a passion that will keep you going forward, and learning techniques and researching and how to really dig deeper in your honesty of what you really want to do, what you really feel is important to you. Otherwise, and we've seen these people who are like my age, especially, who've had these huge like rock careers, and they're out there touring and they just seem bored.
That's got it, like, and so to kind of be in that and sharing that with students and like and living that yourself, I can see how that would be a really like inspiring gig to have, right? And like that, and where the opposite, okay, you've made it and you're doing the whole rock career like that, and like, yeah, you may be filling rooms, but if it's kind of like copy and paste show that happened last night, because when you're playing venues like that, you can't really mess around. They got to get all those people in and out, so I can see where that might be like kind of like locked up, like you're saying.
Well, it's that it's really, I mean, I love going to shows, seeing shows. I love playing shows. I was doing quite a bit in Berlin and actually touring with a much younger act, doing more that kind of music, and I always get something out of it. What I mean by that is there just some musicians that got, who are good, I would say, who got involved in these groups, and because that's really the only way for a group to make money these days is by touring.
Right.
They're out there, just it feels like they're humping it rather, and in many cases I sort of think that, well, maybe there's more of these guys they just never tapped into.
Yeah.
Maybe they just never had the passion to keep learning.
Okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's, what I mean. Quite often, I'll go out and see some groups, and they who are around my age, and it sounds good, it sounds great, and to some extent they're having fun, but there's also a large part of it where they're trying to keep what was going on 20 years ago, and I can feel it in. Because it's not easy touring, especially these days. You just don't have the money anymore. You don't have the tour support from record companies, if you even have a record company. So it's humping your own gear. A lot of these folks are having to do, and you don't get many free hotel rooms, by yourself. Free to be alone, and every the tour, the band and the crew are on the bus. To me, that looks like really hard work. And of course, it's going to have an effect on how you perform.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so the kind of like bounce back for a second. So you switched when you were in college from studying guitar to studying bass,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna get it wrong because I can't remember. I wrote down the note and it's all messed up on my computer here. But did you study with Frecker?
Kid Fricker.
Fricker, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a classical bassist from the city that came up and taught me and I think one other student. Yeah.
So when switching, because like as a bass player, kind of going shifting back to then, like I can see like that move being like, because everyone needs a bass player, and in an interesting way, like what I found, because when I was studying, I went to Cleveland State and I went for music therapy and jazz. And like I was studying, there was always a lot of guitar players, so they always
Right.
like, and
Yeah.
jazz was a new language to me at that time, and it's still to a great degree is, and so I got put on bass, but also that kind of really helped a lot because I was learning how like the feel, the swing, and like how these chords moved, and how like kind of going back to how you said the one scale that we ultimately all fall to, which is chromaticism or the chromatic scale in a way, like really helped with developing like approaches within walking bass lines and such, and that kind of made me think of it differently when I brought it to the guitar. I was wondering if you had a similar experience.
Well, yeah, I was sort of pushed into it by the school I was in, which was Bard College,
Okay.
and they were the music department was um, promoting the students to have another instrument, have a second instrument, and I think I might have taken some piano lessons for a bit, but I decided to switch over to upright bass because I at that time too I was listening to a lot of jazz, a lot of bebop, and then that was like the '70s, so there was all this interesting other stuff coming out. You know, people like Charlie Hayden, Ornette Coleman, Sun Ra, our ensemble of Chicago, which was stretching the jazz into a completely other direction. Or Miles Davis at that time. I mean, the Agartha and Pangea records were very inspirational, and like Pete Cozy, his guitar playing was really hit a chord with me. But as well as what the electric bass was doing with Miles at the time. So I decided I'd take bass up because even a lot of the more jazzier stuff I was listening to, I wasn't connecting to any of the guitar playing at all. Very few guitar players like Pete Cozy and Sonny Sherrick and that were, and then James Blunt Ulmer was a big influence. Um, but it was more of the bands that were like the typical sax, piano, um, drums, and upright bass. And I just thought the upright bass just sort of hit a chord with me. I don't know why. But the thing that was great about it was there was an orchestra, and it was conducted by one of my professors, which was Luis Garcia Renart, who was one of Pablo Casal's students, and he was a world-renowned cellist as well as a classical guitarist. And he was the conductor of the Mid Hudson Symphony, and so going in the orchestra, and then meeting with Luis even privately, who taught me about bowing. I mean, Ken Fricker was great for a lot of that stuff, but uh, Luis took it to a whole other level of how you break down the phrases and which part of the bow to use on each part of the phrase, um, and I was fascinated with the way the bow on a bass string sounds when you're playing around with harmonics. and it almost sounded, it was like this natural distortion. Um, and that's where I took my deep dive. I was into more of the experimental stuff at that time, and sort of followed my heart with that. But by the time I moved to New York City, I thought I was going to be a bassist,
Okay. Okay.
and that didn't happen.
Natural distortion. That's like a that's a great name for an album title or memoir. Like,
Well, when the graininess of the horsehair goes across the
yeah,
string, it has a bit of, puts a bit of noise in there,
yeah,
which I really like.
yeah. I just saw this over the weekend. I just saw this kind of group that had it was like a free group, and they were opening for MSSV, which is a project with Mike Watt and
Oh yeah,
like, are you familiar? It's a really cool project.
yeah.
And the group was called Well, and like the bass player I knew from another project around here, and like I've never seen him play with a bow before, and he playing upright, and like how he like was bringing all this kind of like sound from just his bass using that bow into this. It had such an impact in a way, and like it kind of made me think of like I've never really, as a guitar player, played with a bow, unless I was trying to, whoa, Jimmy Page this, but as a bit, but like it almost has like a sense of breath to it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And then Luis Garcia Renart was really, when you see Luis perform, he breathed along with his bowing. Sometimes it was a little distracting, but it was he really considered it breath. The whole thing breath, yeah.
That's cool, and that I think at that point too, to kind of have that lesson of breath into music really kind of puts you into it.
Mm, absolutely.
So okay, so you go to New York, and the bass playing gig doesn't necessarily go that direction. What kind of, and you start playing guitar in all these groups? How did that kind of like, what happened at that point when you went to New York where this started?
Um, well, I moved down there, and there was a band. These guys I had worked with from college, and they they were getting a lot of attention, so they asked me to join them on guitar. And and I don't know if you remember the studio called Media Sound, which was on 57th Street. It's a pretty well known studio.
Okay.
And we had connections with an engineer, house engineer there, Lincoln Clapp, and he put us in there and recorded our demos for us. And we got a lot of attention from certain people, and it was supposed to be a thing. And then, as a lot of bands do, completely combusted, and from there, because of that, people started using me on guitar. Um, then there was a band that I knew from college. I went to Bard, and across the river was Creative Music Studios, which was run by Carl Berger. And and they had a lot of really interesting experimental musicians, jazz musicians, coming up from New York City or Boston, and doing workshops. And we would also get them doing stuff at Bard too. But I got to know these guys over at Creative Music Studios, and they had this band called Mind Control Salsa, which was absolutely amazing, which later became the Swollen Monkeys. And they started doing these gigs in the city, and I sort of followed them around. Eventually, I went and did a little tour with them. And it was one of these bands, but there are all these people that used to, they were like peripheral players, probably like myself. Um, People like Wayne Kramer, who from Shimmy Disc.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mark Kramer. I'm getting confused. Mark Kramer from Shimmy Disc. Um, uh, Tom Cora, the cellist. They had a very interesting like family of people. But the core of it was Mars Williams, who went on to do The Waitresses and Psychedelic Furs. Dan Clayman, who went on to do The Waitresses. Dave Buck and Ralph Carney, who went on to do the B-52s, and Tom Waits. So there's also this sax player that was playing with them on the peripheral too, named Gary Window. And Gary was someone who I'd seen play with Carla Bley, who was just this phenomenal horn player. And I used to just, every single time Gary was playing around, I go see him. And eventually we hooked up, and it was kind of interesting. I was doing a show down in the East Village with Dave Buck, one of those guys. And this guy comes up to me after our first set and goes, "You play guitar like I play saxophone. Let's start a band." And I'm like, "Who are you?" And he goes, "I'm Gary Window." And I looked at him and I said, "No, you're not." I mean, Gary used to have this like big beard and these like owl glasses and dark hair. And this guy, completely, no beard, no facial hair, completely wearing these weird shades and this bleach blonde hair. And he'd just come off the road playing with the Psychedelic Furs. So I gave him my number, and then we started this project together. It was me, and again, it's with guitar, and that was probably the beginning that set in motion the rest of my career as a guitarist. Yeah, we put an album out on Island called Deepwater, and then that's how I met the Furs, and then eventually Richard had hired me to do some demo stuff for what was going to be a solo record, which then became Book of Days, and then I went over to London to record Book of Days and later World Outside until the band pretty much ended, and Richard started doing the Love Spit Love stuff. Gotcha. And then the band reformed later.
Yeah. Wow, man. It's like, it's interesting, like kind of how like following your interest with like just what you like can lead to like these kind of wild opportunities, and like how people that kind of connect on that, you know what I mean? Not you know what I mean? Just following your own path and meeting people that could relate to that, how it can result in something like your career. Because like diving into your career, man, it's dense, dude. You've got to play with a lot of people. One thing before kind of like kind of asking further about that, did you know Chris Butler?
I wasn't close with. No, I met him several times. Okay. I had a lot of respect for him, but I knew everybody else in the band: Billy Ficca, Tracy Wormuth, and Dan Clayman, of course, and Mars Williams, who was a very close friend of mine.
So I was gonna say with the waitresses, I'm like, man, there's a lot of guys in there. You have to know Chris, because Chris has been just a legend of his own right around here in Ohio, that is, and everywhere else.
Yeah, of course. No, I never really got to know Chris. No.
Okay, cool, man. So with the I can talk still today. With the Psychedelic Furs, at that point, like when you started playing with them, you also started playing cello with them too, right? So
that's another very funny story. We recorded Book of Days at Rack Studios in London, and there was this one song called Torch that they brought in this session cellist, and a really beautiful song. And we came back to the States, and we're getting ready to go into pre-production for the tour, and in a couple of weeks. And Richard comes over at my house, and he's like, he goes, "Oh, you're a musical genius. Why don't you play the cello? We could use the cello." And I was like, Richard, what are you talking about? It's like, no, he was serious. And I was like, but I played upright bass. I studied that, so it's not completely alien, but it's tuned in fifths, not fourths. It's completely different fingering.
Yeah.
and but he was really adamant. And I was like, my part of me was like, you know what? No, I can't do that. So that's crazy. But then I was like, you know what? That's a challenge. That's another thing that I can learn to do. And so I went. My sister had this old cello that she hadn't used in a long time, and sitting out in Connecticut. So I went and got that. Required a bit of work, so I got that fixed up, and I just basically woodshedded a bit. There was that song "Torch," and then there was a couple songs off of Forever Now when Ann Sheldon was playing cello with them. Like "Sleep Comes Down" is one in particular. And so I basically woodshedded and then went into rehearsals. I would say it was a very stressful, a lot of anxiety, practicing the cello in front of several thousand people a night. That's how I that's how I put it. So I went from this sort of role of a guitar player into being a cellist, or faking being a cellist. And I didn't take any lessons. I just sort of taught myself. And then for the next record, we did a lot of writing where I did a lot of cello stuff. And so by the time the World Outside tour happened, I would say I was playing cello on probably about 4 or 5 songs a night. And I have to say, I'm really glad Richard pushed me into this. It was because after that, I went down to Athens, Georgia, to record "Pink Moon," the Nick Drake song, with Peter Buck and Richard, and they wanted me to brought the cello down, and so I was playing these cello lines, interpreting what Richard was singing and coming up with these lines, and then about maybe 6 months later, I get a call from Peter Buck saying, "Oh, we want to hire you to come in and play cello on this record," which wound up being automatic for the people. And so I went in and I played on "Sweetness Follows" and "Bonnie's Got a Raw Deal." And they were sort of pushing me to go down to Atlanta to record the strings with John Paul Jones. And I'm like, you don't understand. Whoa. I'm not a cellist. But I mean, I fake it. That's the best I can do. And it's weird because Peter was really into that, because they just didn't want like a real cellist sound. They wanted something that was sort of off a bit. So anyway, they're on MTV talking about guest appearances by Knox Chandler on cello, and then I started getting all these calls to do cello sessions, and I was like, you don't understand. I'm not really a cellist. If you want a cellist, call James Scarpantoni. Here's your number. But needless to say, I did wind up doing a bit of that, and that went on to playing cello with Natalie Merchant on tour, and Cyndi Lauper. We did a lot of cello with Cyndi.
Wow. Okay. So
fast forward to a couple, like last week.
Yeah.
I was going to these. There's this collective in New Haven called the New Haven Improvisers Collective, and I go there and sit in with them a couple times a month, and there's always tons of guitar players. So I was like, fuck it, I'll bring the cello, and of course they're ecstatic because it's just not another guitar player, and I had so much fun doing it.
It's incredible how, but thinking about kind of the whole like setup of the situation, it was almost like you were encouraged by being called a musical genius, and it kind of gave you the autonomy, right?
Which I'm not. He thinks Richard just felt because I could read music, I was probably a genius.
I mean, like, it's well, for anyone coming from the opposite, reality, kind of, yeah, but also that it's kind of like that learning technique we talked about at the beginning. Like there was like autonomy there, and then the competency came from shedding it, and then the on the job training of doing it in front of a lot of people. Like,
Yeah, yeah, it was nerve wracking, and believe me, there's been times, even afterwards when I've worked with other people playing, I've gone like I don't want to do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. But somehow I keep going back to it. Yeah, and I have and I to the fact that you know, last week I really enjoyed myself. I was playing free jazz on the thing, and it was fantastic. I have a voice in it, but it took me a while to get my voice. Well, that's not true. I think just by default, I had a voice. That's all I had. It took me a while to be able to become competent enough to express it.
yeah. But I mean, wow, that's like that kind of goes back to that just keeping in the like the wanting to know more, the learning aspect of it.
Yes.
Did you do the John Paul Jones gig?
No.
No?
No. I turned them down. I turned them down.
Yeah.
No,
Okay. Okay. Yeah. No,
because
I get it.
I'm not. I don't. I can't even read on the cello.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, that would definitely be like, sorry, dude.
Yeah.
God, wow. That's that. But like, I definitely and to kind of keep it in that sense of like kind of exploration. Now, one thing I read and or heard while diving into your history here is that you felt like you've got sidetracked since college, and can you kind of elaborate on that?
Yes. Yeah, that's kind of where I am today. One of the things I would always say that, and I had some really great students in Berlin, and one of the things I would say is like, look, I've had a great career. I've loved it. I've been very fortunate to go to many places and play with many different people. Um, my only my only regret is I didn't put the work in on my own thing. And I thought I was going to leave college, so I was doing all. I had studied 12 tone composition and improvisation, and I had written these pieces, for groups, um, and thought I would just go down to New York and continue doing that, mostly playing upright bass. And of course, I got sidetracked into the whole rock thing, and there have been many times in there where I've gone back to my more experimental interests, and and part of that probably brings me to be able to bring some of that stuff into the groups and the recordings that I worked with. Especially by the time I got to the Golden Palominos, there was it was all very experimental processing I was doing with a 2290 that I probably wouldn't have engaged in if I hadn't dipped into that side of me, in between the albums and the tours I was doing. Uh, so, um, I'd start my solo type projects, and I would do shows around solo guitar stuff. Uh, and then all of a sudden another tour would come up, or another record date or something like that, and I would switch off and focus on the whoever I was working with at that time. I think if I was to do it again, I would be better with organizing my time, that I wouldn't completely switch off and still continue working and writing. Mars Williams, he passed away about a year and a half ago. He was a force of nature, and working with him, it was pretty impressive. He really juggled his time very well. Because he would go off and work with the Furs and do these tours, and even while he was out there doing it, he was organizing his free jazz tours, He was always constantly working. As soon as he'd get home, he was off doing something, going right into it. Where for me, as soon as I got off like one of those tours, I'd probably spend 4 weeks doing absolutely nothing. Um, I just I just did not have the maybe the motivation is the right word, to jump off a plane and go right into composing or experimenting. Uh, so I always would say to my students, look, don't lose track of what you've got. So there was a course I taught which was about solo performance, and some of these guys did some amazing jobs. I said, don't forget this. You should keep this going. Because bands aren't sustainable.
That's true.
I mean,
Yeah.
where your craft of composition and performance is sustainable, but you have to really do it for yourself. And so then it was about 2005, and I had a bit of downtime, and I did make the plunge, and I made this record called Turquoise, which I never put out. I just didn't want to. I sold it on my website at the time, but actually, I probably will put it out on my label sometime in the next couple of years. But it was a deep dive into just working by myself and creating pieces and exploring deeper into the world of sound for me. Yeah.
That's like, I think, I think ultimately, like, I've talked with a lot of people, and even just like with my professors when I was going through college, and a lot of like, the thing they wish they did was just the advice you're giving is committing to the vision they wanted to do, to like kind of
Right.
doing, in a way, it's kind of like what we all get into maybe this career of music for, is wanting to like do our thing. And you know what I mean? Like, it's interesting how opportunity will open so many doors, but also close some others. Because like, I gotta imagine with like, playing with all these acts like you were, when you got home, like touring with Siouxsie and the Banshees, like for however long of a run, like you're gonna be wiped out. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
I was wiped out, but I also was a parent. I had a son. I have a son, and so I'd get home and it'd be really focusing on him,
right.
100%. He grew up, and when he was about 18, I was very disappointed with. I mean, everything had changed. I split from my wife, and I was living out in Brooklyn, and the apartment I was living in, which was wonderful to begin with, and all of a sudden it became too noisy because of the people upstairs and the people next door who were renovating this library. And it was just endless noise, and I I really and I had come to the end of a long stretch with Cyndi Lauper, and I I had to move. I really had to go somewhere, and I really also wanted to focus more on my own music to get back to where I was doing, where I was back in college days. Where would that have gone? And so I started dabbling with all this different software and this and that, and then I went to Hong Kong and did a couple shows with Budgie, and he had just moved to Berlin, and he suggested I move there. As a matter of fact, his wife talked me into it, to go live with them. And so I said, great, here's a perfect opportunity for me to go and get back to that, reinvent myself. I just didn't see jumping on another legacy act. I just felt like, it's time for me to make a shift. And so I moved to Berlin. And for the first couple of years, I solely focus on what I'm doing now. So it took me a couple of years of that, just woodshedding my ideas and working with this different software, that I then started taking it out and started playing with all these different people and doing these shows around Berlin, until again I got snatched up by a few artists. But this time I didn't lose track of what I was doing. This time I was like, okay, I'm home, get back into this, and then I got the teaching job after being there for about a couple of years. So I was able to juggle that with the teaching job and going back to school and touring. I realized that I realized I have to do this, which kind of brings me up to the present day project. And then of course COVID hit and things changed. But COVID was great for me in a way because it got me deeper into it.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an awful thing for sure, but it definitely, I think for a lot of people that were constantly on the move, kind of hopefully had that same centered thought moment for a little bit. And like this, I mean, not to downsize any of the awful stuff that came with it, but okay. So like, because I want to get into this new record, but one thing I want to ask before getting into it, because I think it may lead into it, the Albert Ayler Christmas ensemble show. So can you tell me, like, because Albert being a Cleveland guy, and my band, we're really into Albert, so we're like we go down rabbit holes with him all the time. So can you tell me about that project?
That was Mars Williams' project.
Okay.
And Mars, as I said before, Mars is a guy who I met back in 1977. He was at Creative Music Studios, and he's been a very close friend during periods over the years, but mostly towards the end of his life. I would say from about, that's not true. Well, we go back probably around the beginning of 2000 or so. We probably really reconnected on a much more personal, spiritual level, that just grew and grew. And then he'd come to Berlin doing his European tours when I was living there, and we would do like solo duet shows together. And he pulled me in as he wanted. Instead of going and doing pickup bands in every city, he decided he'd put together a European band that would tour. And so he asked me to join, and that was with Jamie Branch on trumpet, Klaus Klugel on drums, and Mark Tokar on bass. And we would, play the Ukraine to Switzerland to Austria, Germany, Italy. I mean, it was a these whirlwind tours we do at Christmas time, playing Albert Ayler songs along with Christmas carols. And the way it came about was Mars, as Mars told me, he was just hanging around his apartment one day. This is years ago, and it was about Christmas time, and he was I guess he was playing these Albert Ayler songs, and then he'd hear these Christmas carols coming from the street or something, and then he started doing a deep dive into it, and he realized these Christmas carols are very similar in phrasing to Albert Ayler songs.
Huh.
And that's what happened. And he started writing these scores out of of Albert Ayler songs mixed in with the Christmas carols, all different Christmas carols.
Can you give me an example of one? Like that's an incredible kind of realization.
Off the top of my head, there's so many of them. Like Ghosts going into O Manuel is one example. And then even Christmas stuffing. Is that it? the waitress's song, Christmas wrapping.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Christmas.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So he even had that mixed in
Yeah.
there.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
but you know, hark the herald angels sing.
Yeah.
Yeah, into well, so many of them. But anyway, yeah, that was a lot of a lot of fun. We did one record, which was a live recording in Warsaw. I did like 3 tours of it, and then the last tour of it was Jamie passed away. So I forget the name of the trumpet player. We had a guy named Tom, I think, and Mark Tokar, because he's from the Ukraine, couldn't tour because he was teaching people how to shoot guns. So yeah, so we had this. It was a great band, but the thing was, Mars was got really sick on that tour. It was when he came home and found out how bad it really was, that he had cancer.
Damn. Um. Also, I mean, like, what was I gonna say? Also, before getting to the new record, I wanted to ask about: did you do work with the Mingus family?
I have a project with Eric Mingus,
Okay.
Charles's son. It's called Bursting Bluebone Bark, and thanks for bringing it up because I have to call him today.
All right, I helped.
But Eric, we started this duet project probably about 10 years ago, and he would come through Berlin touring with the Elliott Sharp, and we just see him come over to my place and we start doing some recordings, and then and it was definitely something, and I'd known Eric for quite a while. We both were on a lot of the Hal Wilner shows that he would put on. And we actually tried a project together many years before with a drummer, but that didn't work out at the time. So anyway, Eric, I brought Eric over to Berlin a couple times from New Jersey. We did this big performance for the earthquake victims that happened in Nepal when they had that big earthquake. And so I got him to be part of that. And we just started recording all these ideas. So he then moved to Ireland. And so he'd come over to Berlin, and we'd always be doing these duet shows. And then at one point, we brought in Earl Harvin, who's this drummer, who's amazing. And we started doing these trio shows. And then Eric moved from Ireland to New Jersey to Arizona to upstate New York to back to New Mexico. So he's been moving a lot. Um, and I mixed the record, and I moved back here. I got it mastered. So we're sitting on it. It's a great record. Absolutely, he's a genius. I think he's just the real deal, and we're just trying to find a time to be able to work again together. He gets pretty caught up in his life, and of course I'm kind of caught up in what I'm doing. But it is a project that's a continuous project,
That
and
sounds that sounds incredible. I would love to hear it.
yeah.
Very cool. So okay, so with like the kind of longing and going back and dipping in and out of like the freeness of these projects, and also kind of like the structured based kind of like legacy acts that you're hopping on, like when it comes to the sound, how long have you been like cooking this project up? Has this been since when you're in Berlin, or is this kind of like something that was birthed out of your moving, or?
Both, actually. The idea to do a project like this started happening in Berlin. I mean, thoughts about it, and it had a lot to do with this very close friend who I consider he was my technical mentor, named Peter Freeman. and he was an amazing bassist, but also producer who worked a bit on the later John Hassel records, producing and playing bass on those, as well as numerous other artists. And he was a fan of what I was doing in the early '90s with the 2290, and every other day practically he would be telling me different things I need to be buying and trying out for my arsenal, and actually got me into using Cubase on a computer in the '90s. I was completely computer illiterate, and I was able to get an old computer from my dad, who was a scientist at Yale. And Peter gave me a copy of this black and white Cubase, and I got a sampler and audio media card. And he said, "You really got to dive deep into this with your guitar." And so, and it was a lot. It was a huge learning curve. And then over the years, he was always like, I'd play his music. And there's a record that he put out that Rick Cox and I are on. Actually, it came out after he passed away. But he was really pushing me to do a guitar record, and a guitar the way I look at guitars. And I thought the idea was, it always stuck with me, and he had thoughts on it. He had he got pretty deep with some philosophy around music with it. And then he got cancer and passed away. That was probably about maybe a year before I moved back here. So I and he's also the one who got me using class compliant iPads. When I first moved to Berlin, I went over without any pedals. I took a computer, an iPad, a guitar, and a suitcase, and that was it. And he, at that time, was working with Cycling 74. He invented this app that assimilated the electric repeater, which was a two-space rack mount processor that basically it is a multi-track looper with 4 channels. And I used it a lot. I used it quite a bit on Dave Gahan's Paper Monsters record, and it stretches sound to my liking. It gets down to a real graininess that I absolutely love. And I started beta testing it for him, and he hit me to using an iPad with the RME A to D converters, the drivers, and then from there I got into Ableton Live, and then from there Max for Live, and then I just ditched the computers completely and went straight into working in these apps. And there's a whole bunch of them, and that was like a good couple years of me just creating my thing, which would eventually turn out to be this record. So I moved back here from Berlin 3 years ago to take care of my mother. I mean, she was not doing very well living in this big old house in the middle of the country. No social scene, and there's barns and ponds and streams, things that need maintenance. That when I visited her after COVID, I realized I had to move back and take care of her. She's now for the past year has been in a home, but for 2 years I was here taking care of her and trying to figure out the next move. And first thing I did was get the studio up and running, and I would just sit there and I would look outside and go, man, it's so damn pretty. I feel nothing. I mean, I got all my inspiration from the streets of Berlin or the streets of New York City. I just never, I hadn't been connecting to nature since I was probably, 20, 21 or 22. And so I forced myself, and I had this other record that I had made in Berlin, this solo record called Sea of Stars, which isn't a guitar record per se. And I thought, well, maybe I should put this record out. And a friend of mine suggested I do some artwork for it. And I just couldn't connect doing any artwork with that record. But I started doing a lot of art and started recording these Soundribbons, which has been pretty much the initial stages of any of my compositions these days. And it wasn't until about this time of year, 3 years ago, that I started taking up fly fishing and going for hikes. And one of the reasons I call the album The Sound is because we are on the Sound. Over here in Connecticut, they don't call it Long Island Sound. They call it The Sound. And so I was going down to the Sound at night, night fishing and just exploring nature. And I found after being in these rivers for like 7 hours straight fishing, getting that dry fly just sit perfectly in the bait line without the tippet or the leader nudging it, I found myself really connecting to the rhythm of the water. And at the same time, I got in this whole new area of doing painting, using a lot of alcohol inks, and my writing, my daily writing, journaling was, even though it was rather abstract, it was very much connected to my experiences on a daily basis, either on hikes or being by the side of a river or by the side of Long Island Sound. That the work started coming out of me. I found my inspiration and I was motivated. At the same time, I've been in touch with Bobby Previtt, and we started doing some work together. And so we decided we make this record, which came out a couple months ago, Previtt Chandler on Subsound. And in the making of that, there's a lot of connection to the sound because it's almost the same inspiration was coming from this nature thing. So when I finally finished the Previtt Chandler record, I had a lot of these Soundribbons that I had collected that I didn't use on the Previtt Chandler album, and I started looking at them, listening to them, and the Soundribbons is sort of this, for lack of a better word, these soundscapes that I came up with in Berlin. I was doing these shows in Berlin, doing it along with real time editing with a video on another iPad. So there's the one main rule is there's no synthesizers. It's just whatever instrument that I'm have in my hand at the time, whether it's guitar, cello, bass, trumpet, whatever. But there's also no pre-existing audio. So it's coming up with these sort of soundscapes that really it feels like it's just sort of could go on forever many times when they're working. And so I record them, and then I go back and listen to them, and the ones that sort of stick with me, I'll turn into compositions. So all of a sudden, I started making some new Soundribbons and noticing that, as I get more connected to nature, I'm doing more of this artwork, taking more photographs, writing more stuff. It's all feeling like one thing. It's not all about the music. It's not all about the art. And I got to the point this past year with my mother being out of the house, which gave me a lot more time to put this together as a project. And then, I have a good collection of friends who listen to LPs, and a lot of them were saying, "Oh, you should put this out as a vinyl." And and everyone was like, "No, don't, you should not do CDs. No one's listening to CDs anymore." But I don't know a lot of people. Most people stream.
Yeah.
And I felt like, yeah, but this project somehow it's very close to my heart. It's very vulnerable. Um, and there's all this artwork and this writing I've done and photographs that is very much connected to it. I should make a book, and that's what I've done. So it's a book of that is what I call the album. um, And there's a page for each piece with some prose writing in there. There's photographs of my paintings. There's photographs of actual my workspace. Um, there's photographs of me working. There's drawings, sketches, a lot of journaling in there. And so I designed this book, and that comes out May 30th, and I'll be selling it on Bandcamp with the download code inside it. But it also will be out on Spotify and Apple and all the other streams.
It's interesting, like the idea of connecting with nature via the fly fishing, being in the flow of the river. And like you say things, you mentioned like some of these sound ribbons felt like they could have gone on forever, which I gotta imagine like kind of being within the river, or being within the water source, being within something that feels and sounds like it's going on forever.
With different rhythms going on at the same time.
Yeah, just everything around it.
Like I could notice I would be standing in there with my waders, and I'd be pulled in another direction, completely opposite to the direction the bait flow was going. And just really, and the night fishing too. I go down and sit on the beach or the docks down on the water down on the sound there, and just observing how the tide shifts, especially the tide shifts when they're going into a river. Also, the way the light reflects off of different parts of the area of water that I'm working in.
It's an amazing kind of like a reconnection of the kind of natural distortion in a sense. I feel with a lot of this project, like coming in from like kind of a whole different landscape of like inspiration that you were used to, and bringing this kind of like distorted view to a distorted kind of like, I don't want to say view, that sounds wrong, but idea of distortion being like this kind of like tension and this calmness that follows it. And like flipping through the book, one thing I really like is just within some of the writing, like it ebbs and flows too. Like there's the one page, it was like always bouncing brain, like I think was the line like that curves up. And then there's I can't remember the line underneath it that curves down but the other way. And like I think that like really kind of puts not only the emphasis on the music with the flow of that experience, but also like the visual aspect of it. And one thing with the book I was interested about was like the cover of it was, I think it's like a jellyfish, right? And and then at the back of, I don't know if it's the end of it or the back of the book, because I have the PDF. At the behind it, you have like this tree with this bark on it. Is that the back or is that the last page?
That's the back.
Okay. So it's an interesting like kind of like look at a natural distortion as well, because you see this tree covered in moss. So this kind of distorted view of something that's naturally just there. And then the jellyfish, which is like wild looking, like it's all over the place. It's definitely something natural, but something's going on with it, you know? It's a really
well, that is the photo.
Yeah.
I was fishing. Actually, I was walking around down by the coast there at low tide, and there was this jellyfish just spread across this rock, and I just took a picture of it. And then as I got home, I started looking at it. I said, "My God, this is brilliant!" But your point is correct. A lot of what I'm trying to do, well, actually, it's a lot of what I feel, which is very true to the music too, is taking a very natural source and and somehow processing it, whether it's a guitar, or a trumpet, or a bass, as I said before, or it's a flower, or it's a bark from a tree. Um, I think we all have this thing in us of what reality is supposed to look like, and I, having dabbled and experimented in substances as well as meditation and other spiritual things. Um, I think it's what I see is already there. It's just my perception at the time, whether I see it or not. Um, so my sense of processing, whether it's visually or audibly, um, is trying to get to that place. So to me, it all seems very natural. Like a lot of the images that have been digitized and played with and fucked with, as well as the music I make. It to me, it is nature. Even though to the common eye or ear, it's something completely abstract. Because I think I tend to like spend a lot of time looking at nature, seeing something different than what probably other people already see is there. And that's really what I'm trying to do here.
Because I feel like with like free jazz or any type of like music that kind of falls in that realm of free, right? There is like this kind of like the common perception is it's chaos, right? And like
Yeah.
there's no order. But when you kind of look back and like visualize from a different perspective or vantage point, you start to realize that there is order to it, right? There's reasons why Albert Ayler sounds like Christmas tunes, and like in nature, even though it seems overgrown, when you step back, there's an order to this chaos. And then maybe like the takeaway from everything, right, and the inspiration for everything in the especially with this project is that within chaos is order and within order is chaos. And that's a really insightful takeaway.
No, you're right. That's exactly it. That is it. So when I do these solo shows, none of them are ever going to be the same, and I don't even know what they're going to be like, visually or sonically. Um, I have these parameters, that these of my liminal space to work in, that I hold to. But once I go, I'm immediately confronting uh, not problems, but chaos, and somehow I have to manipulate that into being something that, in my mind, is composed. Um, so there's always going to be it, it's hard to explain. I'm always confronted with like, oh, this is I hear something really interesting in here but at the moment it's not quite working. How do I get it to work? And in the same way with the artwork, like there's something here. It's all formed out of just probably chaos. But I see this. This is it. How do I get to that? And then it's the process of playing around with it, manipulating it, um, editing it to get to where I find my truth is really what it is. So that the fun thing about it for me, this whole project, is that it's always new, and I'm always finding something new out. whether it has to do with a feeling, an emotion, um, being contrasted to another emotion, or whether it's one piece of software working with another piece of software with the video or the even still photos, or it's just one or two apps that are, oh, it's working differently this time, but I love this. This is great. This is me. What do I do with it?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really like genuine and natural way to kind of engage with all of it and be in the moment with it, which I think is super inspiring.
It's very much being in the moment. It's being when my shows are good, for me, um, is that moment where I'm totally in the moment and I'm totally unaware of what I'm doing technically.
Yeah.
And it's taken it, and I had some really good shows lately. I was just in Berlin and did 3 shows there, and they all went really well. And I have to get lost while doing it, and so I have to really know the parameters of what I'm working with, even though I don't know what the outcome is going to be. So that's a little bit mentally consuming, but it has to flip. Where uh, it's almost like if you when you're running and you sort of hit that wall, but if you push through, you're in this other completely different world, and that's what it's sort of like. So it's a bit mentally, it's a bit requires a bit of focus to get the thing up and moving and flowing. And then I always feel like I hit some kind of like wall where it has to shift, and then the shift happens if I'm lucky, and I get lost. Um, I mean, it's a lot because I've got one iPad where I'm processing 2 different video clips at the same time, and I'm processing the whole image at the same time, and then the other iPad I'm catching and processing bits of what I'm playing. So I'm playing and running 2 iPads at the same time, and there's no way if I was to actually sit down and chart it out or organize it or actually create a composition before I actually sit down and do that composition, I just don't think it would work.
No, not like.
There's just no way. Yeah.
It's almost like a sensory DJ.
Yes.
Like
yes.
That's a really like. Knox, I really appreciate your time and your artistry and being able to dive into your career. I have 2 more questions for you before letting you go here. So thank you so much for taking time to chat with me today.
Oh, sure, anytime.
The first question being kind of bouncing back to the book, and it's a minor question, and it's minor because I can zoom in and see it enough. But there's one page that has 2 sheets of, or maybe 3 sheets of sheet music. I was curious to know what was on that.
Okay, those are this is the thing. Some of these pieces, when I go into it, I might go into it with an idea beforehand. Those happen to be I wrote, and I'm always experimenting around the house, or if I'm traveling. And some of these things I do write down. And those are actually part of the song Mars on a Half Moon Rising. So I kind of knew that those, even though it's hard to really tell harmonically what's happening. Actually, one of them there's the melody of Mars on a Half Moon Risings, but there's also the chords for something else, which the chords I mapped out as a progression that I used, but instead of playing it on the guitar, I put it into the sampler in the iPad using guitar as a source, but each note at a time. So it was that part is a little complex. Um, but I wanted to be able to, at some point within the sound ribbon to have some harmony, and yeah, that's what that is.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah, so I don't normally chart stuff out, but if it's a specific, like the melody "Tomorrow's on a Half Moon Rising," I did chart out. Um, so because eventually I might do that song and have a sax play the line or something like that. And then, but always harmonically, I'm always interested in creating some sort of songs type structure for some of these things. And I will sit down and write out some of the stuff that I'm playing. To then go back and uh, do it at a different process since.
Well, it's okay. Well, that because with a lot of things, it's got to be like kind of catching some of it naturally to like, or at least having notes on which direction to go. Um, and I guess so. The last question I had was with I can't remember the name of the bookstore, but you are doing a release with this in a bookstore, right?
I did a pre-release
Okay.
just last Thursday at the Never Ending Bookstore in New Haven, and where could I was originally going to release it on the 18th, but Howard and I thought it'd be a better idea to push it back a month. But since I had the gig already booked and I already had the books, I was able to introduce the audience to the book. They bought some, and gave them an early code to listen to it until they can do the full download.
Very cool. I was going to ask, what? So, are you going to do another release for this, or another like event coming up to like put it out?
Um, I don't know. Been I've been looking around. It's been very hard to find. I mean, I can always do another one at the same place. But I'd rather just I was trying to get something going on in New York City, but it's been very hard to get people to get back to me about places to do it.
Yeah, no,
Um,
that's the struggle with.
yeah, it's been this whole project's been very, very time consuming, and you know I there's so much other stuff to focus on that has more to do with the actual quality of the work than spending all my time writing emails. I put out so many emails. I was trying to get,
Yeah, I know, man. I
yeah,
feel it.
you know, and the thing is I don't know what I'm up against. I haven't been in this country or worked in this country in a very long time, and so I noticed there is a change. It's become a lot more competitive for venues, for people doing gigs,
Yeah.
and um, so my feeling is if I can get something, yes. But once I have the project out and enough press out about it, I would like it'd probably be easier getting shows.
For sure, for sure. Definitely
Yeah,
that all that stuff aids towards it for sure.
yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, Knox, thank you so much for taking time to chat with me. I really enjoyed getting to dive into your career and your artistry and your music. And the album, like, I know we didn't really talk too much about specific tracks, but like, it's very captivating. And like, I think that like all the every which direction we kind of came to is definitely sonically and captured as well as visually. And I did really like. I think the track that really stuck out to me, and it might have been, I think the upright bass really sold it, was the second track, which was really
Oh
cool.
yeah,
Like, but man,
Teeth Stained Edge, and there's a I made a video for it. I don't know if you saw that.
okay, I did not. I'll have to check that out. Awesome, man.
It's it's I mean, I'm on Facebook and Instagram, but it's also on my uh, Knox Chandler video YouTube.
Gotcha. I'll definitely like. So what I'm gonna there, I'm with like the whole kind of approach to teaching that we talked about at the beginning. I think you described it best, and I was like, wow, I find myself doing that too. Is like when you do a thing, but you don't necessarily know the formula or how to explain what you're doing. And like, I was like, okay, yeah, no, I'm bought in on that. That's cool, man.
Well, there was one class I taught, and I practiced. I created all these different problem-based and workplace learning tasks, as well as some threshold concepts exercises.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the course, I asked the students, "Hey, guys, did you learn anything?" And they're like, "Oh my God, this was the best class. I learned so much. I learned about this, and when we did this, and then we did that, and this." And then I said, "You realize that I didn't show you anything?"
Yeah.
And their jaws just dropped, and they go like
What?
they're like, "Yeah." And to me, that was a success. All I did was facilitate the experience, and they learned amongst themselves, and that's kind of how I look at everything in life. Really, it's like if you sort of get out of the way of conventional like lecturing, or you got to do it this way, or it's got to be that way, or there's because all my tasks, there weren't any right answers to them. I mean, it was all about the experience. It's really, and I just love this Winston Churchill quote: "Success is going from one failure to the next without any loss of enthusiasm." And even though I don't really consider things in my life as failures, even though on the paper they probably are, I just think it's all a big part of the learning experience.
I think that
to fall, you got to fall on your face.
Yeah. No, I think that's very well said. And ultimately, I think any knowledge is like self-knowledge, right? So if you can guide anyone in that way that they discover it, if they unpack the metaphor, you know what I mean? It's way more impactful than someone else kind of like explaining it to them, you know?
True.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig at the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.